This is not a new concept, but many players still fail to understand this one thing that will turn them from a below average player to an extraordinary one. Let me give you two imaginary scenarios. First one's on Ascent taking A. You rush onto site and peek tree, an enemy is there and you kill them with ease. You walk onto site, plant with your team, and you win the round. Pretty simple, right? But let's imagine a secondary example where you're on Ascent taking A. You rush onto site and peek tree, but you get shot in the back by someone tucked in the top right corner, die instantly, and your team loses because they can't take any space. Now, the thing you need to understand here is that in both scenarios, you did the exact same thing. But in one it worked and you took the point easily, and the other you died with relatively zero value. Basically, you quote-unquote lucked into the right play, and it only worked based on factors that you had no control over. What you need to understand is that if you don't take control, you will always be inconsistent, having top frag games and then bottom frag games, and even worse, you can stagnate in skill and stop improving or climbing at all. So what do you need to do to ensure that you're making the right play and not just a random play? SkillCapped is the best place to quickly learn the type of decisions you need to be making every single game, how to adapt your play, constantly make the right decisions, and consistently clutch up in situations no one else can. We do this with breakdowns and analysis of many of the best players in the game so you can learn directly from them and look at their decision making and how it can apply to your games. Now, if you're still skeptical, we offer a rank improvement money back guarantee. So if you don't climb, you don't pay, literally zero risk. So what are you waiting for? Check it out right now down below. Now, you need to find the difference between a right play and a random play, so here are the major things that you can do to identify what was the actual right decision and what do you need to do to ensure that you're actually consistently getting value. Now, first off is play the game of what if. And this is as simple as it sounds. What if they're in this location or that location? You need to imagine, what if the enemy is playing in any given location? That's the first question you ask. So running out to sight and ignoring a whole bunch of angles, you can't do that because the enemy might be in a cubby or might be hiding behind a box. You don't know, so you gotta ask the what if. Next off is, what if they have certain weapons? So what if they have a shotgun? What if they're playing a judge close up? Oftentimes you'll see these type of strategies work far better the lower in elo you are because players are not playing around it. They're not asking us what if or even thinking it's a possibility. You need to be constantly asking these questions because if you go into a round and you don't ask what if they have an op and then you walk right into it and then die, you're probably just gonna lose the entire round off of it. And it can be just a simple question to yourself can change the entire outcome of the game. Next up is abilities. What if they have a tripwire? What if they have a turret? These are things that are good to know because if you ever just run out on the site and get hit by a tripwire, you're obviously not paying attention to the enemy composition or the possibility that there is a tripwire anywhere in especially the hot zones that are going to control chokes. Basically, I want you to question everything. Don't assume you know the answer. Ask yourself, what if they're this or that, or they have this or that? What if they're hiding in the smoke? What if they rotate it off? Not assuming, but asking is the first thing that you need to do in order to actually come up with concrete, solid plays, no matter where the enemy is playing, no matter what they're doing, what weapons they have, or utility they're using. Now, next off is to peek every angle. And what I mean by that is to deliberately challenge areas that an opponent could imaginarily be. You see a pro player or a high-level player, you notice how they're specifically peeking, especially the hot angles. They're going to be peeking heaven in a very deliberate way. They're going to be peeking all of the common places that people hold in a very deliberate way. They're doing this because they're imagining if there's an enemy there, how can they challenge that person in a way that gives them the biggest advantage, right? They're going to be doing left to right, make sure that they're not moving in a diagonal motion, and they're making sure to fight or peek these angles like there's 100% an enemy there, so that if there is, they're ready to kill them. Now, sometimes people might think this is tedious, right? You're peeking all these angles that maybe only 10% of the time an enemy's there, but it doesn't cost you anything but a little bit of time. And you're exchanging that time and your discipline for the ability to clear many different places and make sure that you're ready to fight at every single one of those spots if an enemy's there, or if they're not, you can eliminate some of these what ifs that we're talking about. You don't have to imagine what if they're heaven or what if they're in this spot because you deliberately challenged it as if someone was there, and whether they were there and you killed them because you fought it intentionally, or whether they weren't, you still got value because it's one less what if to play around. Next up, you could use abilities and damage to clear quote-unquote what ifs, whether you're mollying a certain cubby, or you're shooting through a smoke, or you're jiggle peeking, gathering information with abilities. All of these things are things you could do to minimize minimize the what ifs, right? Because if we rewind back to that Ascent example, one situation you popped off in and one situation you fed in, but if you can minimize the what ifs, then you could set yourself up for situations where it's always going to be a optimal play, that you're not just gambling on your opponent's position, where your opponent's playing, what abilities they have. You are controlling the variables and you're making it so that you at the very least get a fair fight. And that leaves us to our fourth one, which is record and review. Every single time you die to something unfair, most of the time it's because you didn't do these things properly. You didn't evaluate what was possible. You didn't say what if, and you're going to take a lot of fights that you never actually got to even shoot back. You're dying to trap wires and getting sprayed through smokes. You're dying to judges around a corner. You're getting shot in the back of the head, or you're getting op from a mile away. All these things, it doesn't matter your mechanical skill. You're not going to win these situations. You're fighting in unfair fights, but it's your fault because you get to decide and dictate how you fight, what ifs you have to clear. Now, understandably though, there are going to be some situations where you can't play around every what if, right? There's going to be situations where you're rotating off and around, you're low on time, maybe a lot of characters are dead and you have low abilities, so you can't play around every what if. So in situations like that, you play around the most likely what ifs based on prior information, where enemies are likely to be based on how much time they had to rotate and things like that. So understand that if you are just starting around, right, you have the ability to play around almost every what if. So that doesn't mean like, oh, we just started, I'm gonna rush on because I don't have time to play around all these things. No, you do have the time. It's about being disciplined in those actions to minimize all those random variables that, once again, you cannot control. And one thing I would highly suggest, record your own gameplay and review it back. This is something that is super vital because you can look at some of the situations you died in where you felt it was really unfair, but really rewind it back 20-30 seconds and find a situation where you could have actually changed the odds in your favor, set up a more fair fight for you, or even an advantaged fight up against an enemy, and you're gonna see that there are many better decisions that you could make throughout the entirety of the game. Moving on to number 5, make these disciplined actions habits. And I understand that deliberately clearing all these angles and using your utility every time, it doesn't feel that satisfying when you're doing it all the time and you're not necessarily fighting people because people aren't there, or you're wasting, or you feel like you're quote unquote wasting a molly or a piece of utility because it doesn't gather information or doesn't clear out a specific site. But the value comes from the what if elimination. The value comes from the unknown becoming known, and that is really the important thing to tell yourself. You're getting value. You should feel good about these things, and it's important to go through these motions so much, force yourself to go through them until the point that they become second nature. And that's why when you see a high-level player, they walk up to a site, they're clearing all these close angles, they throw a piece of utility, they clear more angles deliberately, and then they go onto site and specifically challenge certain spots. They're not doing that randomly, and they're not actually thinking about that a lot. They're doing it automatically because they pushed through and forced themselves to be disciplined in their habits, and then it became an intrinsic part of their play. But if you have any questions about this, definitely let us know in the comments down below, and check out SkillCapped right here to quickly level up your gameplay.